He doesn't quote it. Abbas. So he's defining terms. A light in darkness. Darkness means absence of light. So if you see a light in darkness, it's an Abbas. It's a reflected light from some light reflected in darkness somehow, some reflecting surface. It's not the direct light, it's the Abbas of that direct light. And that's the material world. Maya. Next. The Lord's potencies are also described in the following statements spoken by the scholars of Ayurveda. Whoa. Quote, the personality of Godhead whose desires are automatically fulfilled is the original creator of the material universes. His form is eternal and full of transcendental knowledge, and his eternal transcendental potency emanates from him as particles of light from the sun. As an actor who changes his appearance when he enters the stage, the personality of Godhead appears in the form of the supersoul when he enters the material realm. He activates the inert material energy, and in this way causes the creation of the material universes. From Ayurveda. Far out, huh? It makes sense. Ultimately, however, the discerning and manipulating material energies, it's by Ayurvedic, it's the personality of God is the source of them. Okay, next. In the first part of the verse, where the Lord's Maya is described as Abhas, the word Abhas may be interpreted in two different ways in order to match the two interpretations of the word Maya. Parentheses, which may mean either the individual spirit souls or the external material energy. In the second part of the verse, where the Abbas is described as reflected on the Tamaha or darkness, there is no need to interpret the word Tamaha in two different ways in order to fit the two interpretations of the word Maya and Abbas. The single meaning, quote, darkness, naturally fits the two possible interpretations of the verse. Next. The darkness or Tamaha of the material cosmos is described as created by the Lord's shadow. This is described in the following Srimad Bhagavatam verse 3:20-18, where Maitreya Muni says to Vidura, it's about creation. First of all, Brahma created from his shadow the coverings of ignorance of the conditioned souls. They are 5 in number and are called Tamisha, Antatamisha, Tamas, Moha, and Maha Moha, unquote. He's just finding terms. Next, the material world is also compared to darkness or Tamaha in the following verse of Srimad Bhagavatam 10:14-11, where Brahma says to Krishna, Brahma's prayers, chapter 14, quote, where am I, a small creature of 7 spans of the measure of my own hand? I am enclosed in the universe, composed of material nature, the total material energy, false ego, ether, air, water, and earth. And what is your glory? Unlimited universes pass through the pores of your body, just like particles of dust passing through the opening of a window. Next. This verse, 3:28, that's quoted above, 3:20-18, explains that Brahma, using the instrument of the shadow potency or Chaya Shakti, manifested avidya. There we go. full circle is coming around. The avidya potency, how does it become manifest? We're getting like a high technology description of, if you want avidya to manifest, here's how you do it. Brahma, using the instrument of the shadow potency, Chaya Shakti, manifested, quote, avidya, at the time of creating the material universe. The word avidya here may refer to either the different classes of conditioned souls, jiva maya, or to the different manifestations of the modes of nature, guna maya. Next. The difference between avidya shakti, or ignorance potency, and vidya shakti, knowledge potency, is described in the following verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Hey, this morning's verse. Oh, Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings. Next. The knowledge potency is described in the following verses of the Padma Purana, Uttarakhanda, etc., in the Kartika Mahatmya in connection with the prayers of the demigods to Maya, which are related by Krishna to Satyabhama Devi. Quote, there's just 2 verses. As the demigods were offering prayers in this way, they saw a portion of the sky become very brilliant with great light. From that effulgent part of the sky, they heard the goddess Saraswati speak the following words. Quote, I appear in this material world in 3 ways in relation to the 3 modes, goodness, passion, and ignorance. The ignorance potency, avidya shakti, is described in the following statement of the Padma Purana, Uttarakhanda, where the personality guided says to Lord Brahma, quote, the dense darkness of the ignorance potency in this material world is immeasurable and inexhaustible. And that's the end of this particular Anucheda from Bhakti Sandarbha. I don't know the whole context, but this vidya potency is a deterrent for the avidya potency, but it grants liberation, but not bhakti. And this is Bhakti Sandarbha. So without knowing the whole context, likely he's making a compare-contrast between avidya and bhakti. And certainly going back to the question, the original question of Uddhava to Krishna, like I want to know you without obstruction. But here's my obstruction. I'm attached to the temporary, the Maya, the asat. I'm attached. How to overcome it? So there's no obstruction between you and me, and my knowing you, seeing you. If you're going to leave, I want to be with you, even if you're not apparently present. So, how to overcome illusion? So it's starting with this vidya potency, and it's going to take us to bhakti. That kind of knowledge, just say it again, that kind of knowledge that cuts attachment to the temporary, the avidya shakti is vidya shakti, but it's not sufficient. Knowledge is not sufficient. Gyan shakti or vidya shakti is not sufficient. It doesn't yield bhakti. But bhakti, on the other hand, yields it. But we're getting there. So now comes Paramatma Sandarbha. So Paramatma Sandarbha doesn't deal with bhakti specifically, yet it deals with Supersoul interacting with, overseeing, and permitting the affairs of Prakriti, the cosmic manifestation in the big scale, and living entities in their interaction with sense objects in this small scale. Paramatma Sandarbha. So here's a section where this is referred to. It starts, this is Paramatma Sandarbha, text 14 and 15. It doesn't say which Anucheta, but okay, here's the quote. This is a reference from Canto 10, Chapter 88. Shiva is, quote, Shiva is always united with his personal energy, the material nature, manifesting himself in three features in response to the entreaties of nature's three modes. He thus embodies the threefold principles of material ego in goodness, passion, and ignorance. 16 elements have evolved as transformations of that false ego. So what's the 16? 5, 5, 5, and 1. Knowledge acquiring, working senses, 5 objects of the senses, and mind. 16. The 16 elements have evolved as transformations of that false ego. When a devotee of Shiva worships his manifestation of in any one of these elements, the devotee of Shiva obtains all sorts of corresponding enjoyable opulences. The Lord, however, has no connection with the material modes. He is the Supreme Lord, the all-seeing, eternal witness, who is transcendental to material nature. One who worships him becomes similarly free from the material modes, unquote. Canto 10, Chapter 88, verses 3 through 5. Now, Jiva Goswami comments, 3 paragraphs. Shiva is united with his energy, with the upadhi, called Prakriti, in a state of equilibrium of the gunas from the beginning at all times. So equilibrium of the gunas is discussed elsewhere. It's pradhan. So from the Bhagavatam conception, the glance of Mahavishnu carries Shambhu to pradhan. So he's interacting with pradhan. Or the upadhi called Prakriti in a state of equilibrium of the gunas from the beginning at all times. When the gunas become agitated, the upadhis, plural, manifest as the 3 gunas, Tri-linga. Lord Shiva becomes covered by the gunas which have become manifested, guna samvritaha. Quote, question. It is said Shiva is covered by tamagun. Why do you say he is covered by all the gunas? Answer. The material ego, aham, takes 3 forms of sattva, rajas, and tamas. He is ego's presiding deity. Paragraph. From that ego, that's the unfolding of creation. Here comes ego, presided over by Lord Shiva. Controlled by the Lord's representative arose the 16 elements. A person who worships upadhavan, person who worships Shiva, related to all types of wealth, sarva samvibhuti nam, among all these elements, since he is covered by them, attains results he desires. So that's the technology of how Shiva worship works. Just a little distraction for a moment. One devotee sent me a video of a recent yajna that was performed in, I think it was Kerala, where there was a drought, and it's happened several years, and when it happens, so they have a yajna, and it produces rain. And so the brahmanas are describing how it works. And there's different ways of describing how it works. But essentially, it's the sound vibration and the fire seed the clouds, and the clouds cause rain. There's cause and effect. And then at the end of the yajna, they burn the whole yajna area. It's a big tent and a big fire, and everyone's saying Hari Bol while the rain comes down, like drenching rain. And there's a whole procedure, bricks of a certain geometric shape, and the man explaining it says it's set with certain algorithms. I don't know how they understood algorithms. Maybe they're just using modern terminology, or modern terminology is drawing from the Vedas, or whatever the thing is. But the pronunciation of the mantras, and they have somebody with a camera lens seeing as the flames come out of the fire, what's the ultra spectrum. They're analyzing all that. But it's the mantras and the fire and the procedure scientifically produces rain. They say it several times. Seeds the clouds, and the clouds pour rain. So here we're getting the science of worship Lord Shiva with an attachment for something, and how that something comes, because he's the Lord of those, the Lord of false ego, and the false ego generates these 16 things. So you worship Lord Shiva, and you can get yours, select from the menu. And that's how it works, because he's the Lord of those energies, because he's the Lord of false ego. Next, it is well known, or for this reason, Vishnu is not touched, para, by the coverings, prakriti. He is thus beyond the gunas. How can he be related to the gunas? The reason is given. He is directly the Lord. There is no obstruction between this form of Vishnu and the Lord, as in the case of a reflection. Here we go. This morning's verse. There is no obstruction between this form of Vishnu and the Lord, as in the case of a reflection. It is said by Krishna, understand that Vidya and Avidya are my Shaktis, although they're reflections. Because the light that's generating the reflection is not disconnected from the reflection. The reflection isn't the same as the light. Reflection is a reflection. It's really far out. Okay. As in this verse, sometimes it is said, the Lord is possessor of sattva shakti, since he is said to have a body, or tanu. However, the Lord handles these energies by his glance alone. In this same section, Canto 11, Chapter 11, uses another really easy to understand example, like a magnet and iron filings. Now, a magnet doesn't have to touch the iron filings. If the magnet moves, the iron filings move. And there's a certain pattern depending upon the magnet and the proximity of the magnet and so on. So like that, there's no direct contact. The Lord never directly contacts material nature, but it's under his direction, like a magnet moves iron filings. And Lord Shiva directly contacts. So he's now influenced by. Here it's saying his glance. He bestows knowledge, sarvadrik, to Brahma, Shiva, and all others, and is the original witness, upadrashta. Thus, a person who worships Vishnu attains results beyond the gunas. Shukadev speaks these verses. Then 15. I warned you it's philosophy. Thus it is said that this Vishnu is non-different from the Purusha. Bhagavatam 2:6-32. I, Brahma, create under his order, and Shiva destroys under his order. Holding his three energies, the Lord protects the universe as the Paramatma, unquote. Shruti also explains this from Maha Upanishad. The Lord, full of the highest bliss, beyond the gunas, without birth and destruction, creates the universe through Brahma and destroys it through Shiva. So this reference from 2nd Canto, Chapter 6, it's Brahma speaking to Narada. One more, if you're not asleep yet. Again, Paramatma Sandarbha, going further, Anucheta 54-55, text 1. In discussing the various causes, two activities of the nimitta form of Maya will be first discussed. So, nimitta and upadan Maya. Nimitta is the part that's not changed. And upadan is the part that's changed. That's one, there's far more, but that's simple explanation. The classic example is clay is upadan. And the potter's wheel and his instruments, that's the nimitta. And the potter is the cause of the clay pot. So there's, and then there's the cause of the potter, the remote cause, ultimate cause. So nimitta is the wheel and the implements used by the potter in making a pot. So it's in relation to creation. So nimitta Maya is going to be discussed. These two activities of the nimitta Maya are described in the following words of the Bhagavatam. Hey, it's this morning verse. O Uddhava, both knowledge and ignorance, being products of Maya, are expansions of my potency. Both knowledge and ignorance. Now these are nimitta Maya features of Prakriti. Both knowledge and ignorance are beginningless and perpetually award liberation and bondage to embodied living beings. Srila Sridhar Swami comments, quote, in this verse the word tanu means, quote, the two potencies. Tanu normally means body, but again, Maya creates bodies. Tanu. And me Maya vinirmite means created by my Maya. Okay, it's this third potency, pradhan, that creates forms. Even though it is in the singular, the compound word moksha bandha kati should be understood to be in the dual. Here someone may object. It is not so that because they are effects and not causes, bondage and liberation cannot be eternal. An effect is not eternal, is the argument. So how can Krishna get away with saying these energies are eternal? They're effects. In answer to that, it is not so that because they are effects and not causes, bondage and liberation cannot be eternal. The verse answers this objection by speaking the word adye, which means existing from time without beginning. The meaning here is, quote, when I teach untruth, I am trapped in material bondage, but when I teach the truth, then I attain liberation. That is the meaning. So there are potencies that may be manifest, not manifest, and when they're manifest, and they're not, but they're potencies that are eternal. Maya Shaktis, eternal effects, have their cause, and the cause is that potency, and it creates an effect. So you can describe the effect. This is the very question. How can you say Nitya Bada, Nitya Siddha? Right? They're effects, but they're potencies of the Lord, creating an effect on the eternal soul that's unchanging. Next. Because they are manifested from Maya's activities, knowledge and ignorance are here called activities of Maya. Because Maya is limitless, what she creates has no beginning. That is the meaning of this verse. In this way, the individual soul's liberation is manifest. From ignorance, bondage is manifested, and from knowledge, liberation is manifested. In this way, liberation is eternal. That is the meaning. You want to argue with Jiva Goswami? Next, in Srimad Bhagavatam 11.3.16, that's later in the same chapter, it is said, Krishna is saying to Uddhava, I have now described Maya, the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This illusory potency, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is empowered by the Lord for creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the material universe. Unquote. It should not be said that because it does not declare that Maya potency can grant liberation, the statement disagrees with the previously quoted Bhagavatam verse. The truth is that this statement, later verse in this chapter, the truth is that this statement this is a chapter 3, not chapter 11. I'm confused. Anyway, the truth is that this statement, Bhagavatam 11.3.26, does declare that Maya can grant liberation. This statement declares that Maya brings final annihilation. The final annihilation is described, is in truth liberation. The final annihilation is not just in the cyclical annihilations, when material existence is annihilated. It reminds me, what was being said here reminds me of Vyasa's vision in trance, seeing Maya was behind the Lord. That was permitted by the Lord. But the Lord, having Maya behind the Lord, he could then see the Lord. And then ultimate annihilation is no more affinity for the temporary, and only affinity for service to the personality of Godhead. That's the bhakti principle. That's the final annihilation. So it's granted through the agency of Maya, but it's under Krishna's direction. Okay. Finally, what is called vidya, or knowledge here, is the the means by which the Lord's personal potency of transcendental knowledge is manifested. The avidya, or ignorance here, is of two kinds, avaranatmika and vikshepatmika. The first of these covers the soul's natural spiritual knowledge, and the second of these overwhelms the soul with many ideas that have nothing to do with the real truth. That's a great definition. I don't know if you've struggled with the distinction between these two, but it's really clear. I'll say it again. The avaranatmika is the first of the two. That's the throwing potency. The first of these covers the soul's natural spiritual knowledge, and vikshepatmika overwhelms the soul with many ideas that have nothing to do with the real truth. Throwing and covering. You're still sitting here, you haven't left yet. Last is Anucheda 55. I'll try to summarize at the end. Now the various causes will be described. The most celebrated of these is the Maya potency, which has three aspects: Jnana, Icha, and Kriya. Knowledge, desire, and activity. Among these, knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is described in these words of the Bhagavatam 3:5-25. Quote, "The Lord is the seer, and the external energy which is seen works as both cause and effect in the cosmic manifestation. O greatly fortunate Vidura, this external energy is known as Maya, or illusion, and through her agency only is the entire material manifestation made possible." Sridhar Swami comments on this verse. Here the words Savai means the seer and the seen. The word Sat means what is seen, and Asat means what is not seen. Sat Asat Atmika means which has the nature of both Sat and Asat. Next, the desire feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead described in these words of the Bhagavatam 3:5-23, 2 verses before the one just quoted. This is Maitreya to Vidura. The Personality of Godhead, the Master of the living entities, existed prior to the creation as one without a second. It is by his will only that creation is made possible, and again everything merged in him. Srila Sridhar Swami comments. Here the word Atmecha Maya means follows the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the magnets and the iron filings example. Or the overseeing Upadrashta, by his vision, by his willing potency, things happen. The activity feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is described in these words of the Bhagavatam. So, Icha, Jnana, and Kriya. No, it's Jnana, Bala, and Kriya, or sometimes Jnana, Bala, and Kriya. So here, Icha is exchanged for Bala. But the Lord's Icha happens by Bala. So, the activity feature of the Supreme Personality of God is described in these words of the Bhagavatam 11:3-16, same one. I have now described Maya, the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This illusory potency, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is empowered by the Lord for creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the material universe. I think this is Narada speaking to Vasudeva in Dwarka. Narada is giving transcendental knowledge to Vasudeva. Two more. Although the knowledge and other features of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are never Maya, nevertheless, Maya is one of the Lord's potencies. Therefore, the Lord's knowledge and other features are not directly employed for the purposes of illusion. Rather, they are used to benefit the Lord's devotees. It is only the material reflection of the Lord's activities that are engaged in Maya's activities. I'll read that again. It is only the material reflection of the Lord's activities that are engaged in Maya's activities. It is in that sense that the word jnanadi is used here. Finally, the Lord's knowledge and other features are of two kinds. One, the features that, because they are the Lord's own transcendental opulences, inspire faith in the Lord himself. And two, the features that, because they are opulences given to the Lord's devotees, inspire faith in the Lord's devotees. The former are opulences like the relationship between the seer and the seen, the Lord's desire to create the universe, the Lord's potency of time, and other like features of the Lord. The latter are like knowledge, ignorance, desire, activity, and other like features. Well, if you wanted a transcendental education, just read Srimad Bhagavatam. Like, how does it work? And, you know, for common audiences, again and again, Prabhupada would invariably bash the scientists, philosophers, and political leaders as misleaders. And he would, you know, besides doing it himself, he would then say, you know, you have to expose these rascals. And, you know, listen carefully at how many times he uses the word rascal. It's really, you know, an iconoclast. He's intent, very focused, and, you know, very effective at smashing the bastion of illusion. Because the would-be brahmanas and kshatriyas are accountable for misleading people, and people are misled. So in order to take shelter of transcendental sources, the other sources need, well, anyway, Prabhupada is like got a frontal attack again and again and again. Again and again and again and again. And he never tires of it. You can hear his voice get really energized. He's like, and it's not just he enjoys a fight. He enjoys a fight, but he wants people to relieve of suffering. And suffering is because of ignorance, and ignorance is being propagated by these so-called people, so-called intellectual, scholars, scientists, philosophers. And people hold them in regard as natural, but they're misleaders. And, he sees it and he's relentless. There's a nice, I've seen it many times, the little video clip of Prabhupada in his garden in Los Angeles. So if you've been there, you can, or at least picture in your mind, his quarters are over here, and the temple is over here, and there's a little garden over there. And, when you're looking at the temple from the street. So over there is a garden, and Prabhupada would go and sit in a nice chair with trellises and, shade for the California sun. And, people would come and hear him speak. So one time was a video recording of all professors in their suits and nicely dressed, and Prabhupada, in his sannyas attire. And the part that this video clip shows is they were smiling and saying, Prabhupada, why do you use this word rascal? It's so strong. And, he said, they're mistaken, or something. And then Prabhupada would, big smile and said, "Rascal, the summation of all mistaken." He didn't want, and they were just like sitting there because they were being called rascals, and they're taking it. Please don't call us rascals. You could say mistaken. Don't be, it's too harsh. And so, not only when he was speaking to a devotee audience, but even to these individuals themselves, frontal attack. And they took it. Some of course didn't, but many did. Highly learned people. Means, there's some willingness to go beyond illusion. Otherwise, they wouldn't take it. No, do they still have affinity for illusion? Most likely. But, the opportunity through association with a great soul, it is such an opportunity. And here's what Krishna is doing with Uddhava. And it can be read as, however, different people are going to read it in different ways. But what's the connection? Seems to me to be a really important topic. Otherwise, why is there's so much attention? This is the fifth chapter. It's on the same topic. It's, the obstruction to seeing Krishna or understanding Krishna factually. Because how many people have a notional understanding of God and don't have a, what you might say is a factual understanding of God, ourselves included. Not just, the other people, other isms. Now, one can give credit to other isms that they have, there's some faith in God. But that faith in God is obstructed. And that's what Bhagavatam is, by Uddhava's question, is attempting to take us beyond the obstruction. So how is Maya working? And there's a couple other points. From earlier section, we heard from Krishna's words in the commentaries, these three, and now we just read there's another three. Jnana, Icha, and Kriya. That's the Lord's potencies. And how each of the three manifest and are described in the Bhagavatam. We have examples. And there's other models, Jnana, Bala, and Kriya, which Prabhupada would often quote, Prasya Shaktir, Vivadaiva, Shuryate, Svabhaviki, Jnana, Bala, Kriyacha. And it fits in with the process of creation. If you study carefully the description, you don't get creation without Bala. You don't get anything. You don't get nothing moves without some strength, and that strength behind the strength is Icha. So either way is fine. But so there's different models of describing what Maya Shakti and Krishna's Swarup Shakti is behind the Maya Shakti. The Maya Shakti is the reflection. So again, the question: how does it work? How do the puzzle pieces fit together? And it's using one of Prabhupada's favorite examples. Maya burns, and fire burns. You may not know how fire burns. That's okay. But you put your hand in fire, whether you're a child or a scientist, you put your hand in fire and fire burns. So if you want to know how fire burns, there's, how does the material energy work? Here's how it works. And taking shelter of Krishna, as opposed to taking shelter of anyone else who are manifest by Maya, because Maya manifests things of this world. Take shelter of Vishnu, and Vishnu is not different than that original source. So that much, that's good to know. And then the workings, this is a strong example, or teaching, strong teaching, to say, Jnane prayasa udapasya namanta eva. We don't try to understand Krishna by the Gyan process. Same, when we're going through this, it's like puzzling. And, maybe really intellectual people can understand all this, but, I'm not sure I understand all this. It's a little over my head. But the understanding is not going to be accessible by a highly intellectual person either. It's by the process of hearing and bringing attention more and more and more and to Krishna and away from the deluding potency, the avidya potency because the vidya potency is, we just read, it is something that Krishna uses. Driving it is the transcendental knowledge, so that moves into this realm through the vidya potency. Like people study books. Maybe, Subal, you remember that fellow that would come to the Radha Govinda temple, and he'd sit over in the corner, and he had a bag, and in his bag was books. And he was just like skinny guy, older fellow, thin, and he just read books. Kirtan is going on, devotees are dancing and dancing and dancing, and he's reading his books off in the corner. And then in that bag, along with books, he had some containers for prasadam. So he went downstairs for the feast, and then took his feast and had them fill up his containers of prasadam. And that was his program. Remember that guy? Older fellow, gray hair, very thin hair, skinny, sit, with his leg folded over in the corner against, reading his books, right in the middle of everything, while the class is going on, while the kirtan is going on. Remember that guy? So, nonetheless, he was getting purified, certainly by prasadam and by the kirtan and whatever the class was. And I have no idea, I never was interested to find out what he's reading. I was just happy that he was there, hearing. So this process of hearing works. It may take a long time, may take a short time, or somewhere in between, depending upon the attentiveness and faithfulness of the hearing. But the hearing is effective. What's our qualification for understanding Bhagavatam? What's our qualification for understanding Krishna and all of these technology things? How Maya works? It's a very elevated subject. That's okay. Continue to hear it with faith that the purpose of this narration stems from Uddhava's question: how to understand Krishna without obstruction. How to have our connection with Krishna intact, not just notional. Anyway, Bhagavatam is that kind of literature. Let's see if we're going to go into this some more tomorrow. That's the last time tomorrow. At least this verse 3. It's an important verse. There's all this commentary on it. See if there's some discussion.
Maharaj, so understanding, listening to these classes, the principle the principle of becoming liberated and becoming free from the entanglement for the influence of the material modes of nature. That principle is relevant as long as I have a false ego. Is that the understanding?
Yes.
When you become free from false ego, then that level is gone, and then now you're in another.
It's the Brahmabhuta stage. And before the Brahmabhuta stage, and one wants the Brahmabhuta stage.
And that's when bhakti begins.
Mad bhaktim labhate param. That's where it begins. Now, begins means Shuddha Bhakti, and before that is practice Bhakti.
Now, one more question. if I may.
Yeah.
In the Bhakti, in the Sri Ishabanishad, one of the Bhakti Shastra, Vidya, as far as I understand, is the Ishabasha Principle, which is
Vidya is a what kind of principle?
Ishabasha.
Ishabasha.
Yeah, Krishna is the controller and the owner, and then everything should be offered to him. So that in itself is equal to bhakti in our,
Vidya doesn't produce bhakti. Vidya can produce liberation, but not bhakti. Bhakti produces bhakti. Within bhakti is vidya, but vidya doesn't produce bhakti.
So when we receive vidya, we be engaged in devotional service. So
That's us. That's you and me. But there's many people that read Ishopanishad and they don't become bhaktas. They get knowledge, and their implication in avidya is diminished by vidya. But it doesn't in and of itself yield bhakti. Bhakti yields bhakti.
yeah, the reason we get bhakti is because a bhakta is giving us this
And
transcendental.
there isn't another way. So we read Ishopanishad, or we can read other Upanishads described by, and tomorrow we're going to hear from Gopal Tapani Upanishad. And, that's a devotional text. But most of them are the Vidya texts, as opposed to, cutting avidya. Okay? Anything else?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Can you please explain again that regarding that analogy you are giving about the pot maker and the pot and the clay?
Yeah.
So you said pot is the nimitta. So I was thinking, again, there is in Bhagavad Gita, like Krishna said to Arjuna that nimitta matram
Bhava Sabyasachi.
Sabhyachasya. So that means Arjuna was becoming nimitta.
Yeah.
So here pot also became nimitta.
No.
How is that?
He is, he is the instrument, like the potter's instrument. And the potter has to turn the wheel. The potter has to apply the instrument. So Krishna's the potter and Arjuna's the instrument. He's not the clay. He's the instrument. The clay is the Krishna's, what it's going to look like in the other end. The potter starts with an idea of a pot before he begins the pot making. And he makes different moves with his hands and instruments in order to fashion this or that or the other kind of pot. So Krishna is the potter. I mean, he's the ultimate. He's the cause of the potter, but he's the ultimate, the cause of all causes. Parama Karuna, Parama Purusha. It's the supreme Karana. Ishwara Parama. Okay. Yes. This is different kind of literature, isn't it?
It was certainly complicated. I was looking at this Ishopanishad verse following up from Subal Prabhu's comment. So this verse in text 11, Ishopanishad says, one who can learn the process of nescience or avidya and that of transcendental knowledge of vidya side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. So two questions. Is the vidya and avidya mentioned here used in the same way as in text 3 of this 11th chapter?
The answer is If you are a bhakta, the answer is yes, and if you're not, the answer is no. Following from the response to Sabal. Vidya does not give bhakti, but one who has bhakti has vidya. The ultimate blessings of immortality is, we know, it's not just sayuja.
At least how I am understanding this verse relative to this other verse from 11th canto is understanding how the workings of Maya, which has these two features of vidya, leads to immortal blessings, or full blessings of immortality.
Yeah. Yeah. The Vedas are like a desire tree, and according to the desire of the living entity, they're going to experience something from that desire tree. And the desire tree gives according to the desire. You know, the Vaishnavas are glorified. We'll hear this tomorrow morning. The Vaishnavas are glorified because even in those Karmakanda sections of the Vedas, they're searching for Krishna. Covered. It's like that example we heard yesterday of the bees. Even when Balaram goes deep into the forest, there is his fragrance, and they follow the fragrance. And so they're great personalities. And they're not just like Monavrata people. They're singing the glories as they're following. So the Vedas deliver everything, and those who are exalted Vaishnavas, they're not bewildered by the flowery language of the Vedas. They're searching for Krishna. But those that are bewildered, that they see what they see. And they don't see what they don't see. That's, there's verses like that over and over again. You're visible, but you're not visible. And supposing the pastimes of Krishna become unmanifest, then ordinary people cannot see. But ordinary people couldn't see properly anyways, even when his pastimes are manifest. Or see the deity form or the sound of Krishna's name and so forth, the Bhagavatam. They don't see. They look at it through another lens and they see what they see, according to... So, the merciful nature of the Bhagavatam is it elicits that higher response. It doesn't guarantee it. People can say no. So this, the Upanishads, it's transcendental, but it can also delude or mislead those that have misleading desires. So how do you get free from misleading desires? It's ignorance. By bhakti, by knowledge. That leads to bhakti. Knowledge alone is not enough. So somehow we landed up in a bhakti life. And there's lots of distractions and swirlings of the material energy going on all the time. And that's, it's a purification for the bhakta. It's an opportunity to not get distracted, and as opposed to getting distracted. And that's the test or the examination of bhakta. They stay fixed. Jitendriya, microphone.
Didn't Srila Prabhupada, Prabhu don't sit there, they crush him and he gets so screwed up. Didn't Srila Prabhupada say the book distributors were Dhiravrata?
Were what?
He would compliment the book distributors who were going at the airport. I remember he called them Dhiravrata. They're focused,
Yeah. I don't know that he used that term specifically, but yes, he would see, I know because I've heard many times, when engaged with people that are not oriented towards transcendental knowledge, to engage them in receiving transcendental knowledge, it's a difficult task. And, so they just stay on course because they know what the mission is. The mission is mitigating ignorance. And persons that are in ignorance don't want to be mitigated.
I remember Tripurari Swami, he would just bounce off one person after another, and he'd just keep going all day long. It was amazing to watch him. And then other devotees would follow that also.
Others, that each had their style. But all the book distributors, not just in the airport, but anywhere, it's the lifestyle. And there's a fuel that keeps them going, and an intelligence that keeps them guided. And it's a reciprocation by knowing Krishna is pleased, keeps the wheel turning.
To those who are irresolute in purpose, their intelligence is
many branch.
To those who are resolute, their aim is one. Maybe we could get a printout of that someday. The class, for further reflection.
Okay. We have another question over here.
For the Festival of Holy Name that's coming up.
Yeah.
One of the topics that I've been preparing for is from Nectar of Instruction, verse 7.
7?
7.
Yeah.
Where Rupa Goswami is expressing wonderment that this avidya, because the reference is to vidya and avidya, that the jaundice of avidya does not allow a person to relish the sweetness of Krishna's names, forms, etc. And the remedy he recommends is to just do it. Keep doing it, anudinam. And then he has a qualifier that it is adarat, with great regard and respect for it. So the question that I've been pondering upon and would seek your thoughts on is, for a person who is suffering from avidya and cannot taste the sweetness, how can they have respect or regard for that very object? Because it tastes bitter. So mercy is one factor. But what is it that keeps a person to keep doing it, hoping that one day it will taste sweet?
It's not just one factor. I mean, it's an important question and a deep question. Minimally, it's faith, adau shraddha. And that faith then becomes reinforced or strengthened or nourished by sadhu sangha. And by, in simple terms, sadhu sangha. Because sadhu sangha without faith doesn't produce anything. Or it's modest what it will produce. So sadhu sangha with faith. Then comes bhajana kriya. So that the quality, the brightness of sadhu is important for encouraging people to continue when they're afflicted by avidya. Sadhu sangha is imperative with faith. And sadhu sangha doesn't just mean like, an elder Vaishnav or something like that. Sadhu sangha means sadhu sangha. It's those who are devotees. Or let's say, a friend. So a friend commonly is kind of like in a peer relationship, can be a more advanced friend or a less advanced friend. But, pure association, when the closeness, when the heart is open to a peer that understands their function in relation to their friend, is to help them remember Krishna, to nourish that faith in Krishna. I mean, a practical example that I've heard is during this pandemic period, japa groups have formed. Sometimes it's big ones, sometimes it's small ones, sometimes it's 10 minutes, sometimes it's 2 hours. But it gives strength. When left alone, the same is not the experience. Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, starting nourishing faith. I've been hearing some Bhagavatam classes where Prabhupada is describing Krishna's departure, and in the course of, he's in California, LA, and he's speaking about affinity, for the 4 regular principles. And how can people follow the 4? Before they weren't following, and now they're following. So how are they able to follow? By association. When they couldn't before, now they can. So stay in association and continue to follow because you want to. So there's some behind the sadhu sangha. There's some faith that this higher attainment is feasible, possible for me. I won't die without it. I won't, I'll progress with it, with the chanting and other processes, other devotional processes. Do we have online question? It's pretty late. Do we have questions?
There are online questions. This is from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. In the last class, Vidya was compared to the goddess of fortune and Avidya to Durga by Sridhar Swami.
Yes.
My understanding is that the goddess of fortune means bhakti, not just liberation. Can you please clarify?
Well, it's the same as Shabal's question. Meaning, the goddess of fortune can be the bestower of bhakti, but the goddess of fortune can be the bestower of other things besides bhakti. It depends on the regard that one has for her, and the regard that one has for Narayan, whether we're going to see her as the bestower of bhakti or not. Next.
Does Lord Shiva preside over Tama? Does Lord Shiva preside over Tama or is controlled by it?
He presides over it.
If controlled, how does he direct sincere devotees to Lord Vishnu?
There's some influence, there's some, a word is used, tinge. He's, the best of all Vaishnavas, but there's a tinge. Just like whoever's asking this question, how can you be an instrument to give bhakti to others if there's some influence of Tama? You're just going to have to wait until you're an Uttama person before you can give bhakti. That's not our teaching. Next.
This is from Snehawali Mataji. To confirm the understanding about Vidya referred to in this verse is both spiritual potency as mentioned in the BBT purport and is the empirical knowledge which awards liberation to the jnanis. She's asking because the BBT purport says that these potencies switch as Krishna's desire.
No,
Is this the correct understanding?
no, they almost correct. They're exhibited by Krishna according to the regard the living entity has for Krishna. And he exhibits this feature, that feature, according to the regard living entities have for him.
And then she has a comment. It looks like this verse supports the verse Srimad Bhagavatam 4.9.16 in Dhruva Maharaj's prayers, where Dhruva Maharaj says that Brahman has two opposing elements, knowledge and ignorance. Could you please comment?
Could you read the verse again from 4 Canto?
I'll have to pull it up.
No, just what does she say it says?
She says it says that Brahman has two opposing elements, knowledge and ignorance.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
Then Amara Mataji asks, this is the last question. In the 3rd canto, Uddhava is explaining how the Yadavas could not understand Krishna's position, and they considered him only as the all-pervasive supersoul. How this Vidya and Avidya are manifesting for people being so close to Krishna, and actually his own family members, and for the people who just started knowing Krishna by Srila Prabhupada's mercy?
It's the principle is the same principle as the previous question. That is, Krishna reciprocates according to one's regard for him. They're family members, and they're in Dwaraka, and they see his exhibition of opulence in a way that strikes their heart accordingly, and they see him the way they see him because of their heart's orientation, and he reveals himself to them according to their heart's orientation. That's the bhakti principle. And there's in Krishna's unlimited, so there's unlimited ways that elevated personalities see him. And they're seeing him the way that they're seeing him because of their orientation. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.